Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Belly to Belly. And today our topic is strategies for entering the US market and getting traction. And we're joined by the team from Inner Onion, which is just the best company name ever. Welcome, Steve. Welcome, Nasser.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
It's a pleasure. And so, as we've talked about, our audience here are all companies that are interested in entering the U.S. market. And they have, as you know, many, many questions about how to succeed here. And obviously getting sales traction is center to their success. And not just validation, but obviously economic success. And, I think before we sort of hop into our topic, if you could just give us a a bit of an overview of what Inner Onion does, and particularly for companies coming into the U.S. What services do you provide?
Yeah. And Nasser, you better really explain the Inner Onion name.
Yes.
And where that came from, because that's a good kickoff always.
Well, our first client was a digital asset management company based in Brighton, England, and one of our early calls, I think he was the head of customer support, basically said that our product is like an onion. Every time you peel away a layer, it gets more complex. Yeah. And so I thought that's actually a very good name for maybe our business. And so I bounced around. I said, Steve, maybe have you ever discovered your inner onion, Steve? And he said, let's call our company Inner Onion.
It very much makes sense, and certainly anyone that's peeled an onion knows. Yeah. The layers are forever, for sure.
Onions taste good, but they make you cry, and that always is a very nice, sort of a cocktail conversation starter.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think one of the things that resonated with me when we came up with the Inner Onion idea was analysis and learning, and focus. And so what we try to do with our clients as they come into the U.S. is peel back the various layers to really understand that not only the core of their business, but also the core of their strategy, the core of their users, their customers, right? What are their customers' pains? And what transitions have to be made from overseas coming to the United States. So that's where getting to the core of that Inner Onion comes from.
Yeah.
So is it, just so I understand, is it all about strategic development, or are there other parts of your service for the internationalizing companies?
Depends on what the client wants. I mean, so we can actually write the go-to-market plan for them if that's all they want. Then if they already have a go-to-market plan, we'll implement that for them, or we'll implement the one that we wrote for them. And it's all about, what they need. I mean, in some cases, they actually want to build a reseller network, or they want to develop a channel program. In some cases, they want to just hire salespeople or tech support teams. It's quite varied. I mean, I'd say that our sweet spot is B2B SaaS, but we've, taken on considered other types of clients, some even in the food tech business or the fashion tech and so forth. And we're getting now enough traction where there's a company in Australia that contacted me last night about building materials. We're going to meet with them. It just so happens that we know some VCs who are in the construction tech industry. So maybe we can connect them and not even take them on as clients. We actually have learned that we can get a lot of goodwill out of people by just helping them. In some cases, just handing them our non-NDA format or our mutual, what do we call
non-compete or something like that?
Well,
referral agreement.
Referral agreement is one very good example. A lot of people don't have mutual referral agreements, templates to work off of.
Yeah, and the flip side of that coin, though, is a focus on strategy. So we do have some clients that may have a strategy internationally, but they don't have a strategy in the US. And so what we try to start with is to understand, do they have a strategy? Have they thought it through? Do they need one? If they need one, then let's help them with their market research. They're defining, who their users are and then help them define that strategy and then test it. So we've got clients in the software space that are in testing mode. And so they're trying to understand, the precise use cases that their customers are going to need. So there is some strategy, either discussion or research or work that we do that flows into a marketing plan and a marketing strategy.
Well, and that may be a good segue then to kind of hop into our topic, which is, sometimes to understand the best practice, it's good to understand where companies are challenged or fail. In your work with companies coming into the U.S., particularly around the area of revenue generation and traction, where are the big fail points that you see?
What are the big disasters, Nasser?
Well, the disasters, I mean, I know in very general terms, I'd say you just shouldn't, just plant your flag here and start selling. I mean, that doesn't work. You need a growth plan. You need a strategic plan. You need, a timeline. You need some benchmarks. You have to basically have some metrics as to, where you want to be when. And we often do hear people just saying, I want to start selling.
Yeah, they do say that. That's like, I want to sell in 2 weeks. Can you help me?
I know there was a company in the HR, SaaS field. They wanted 50 logos, he said, by the end of the year. And this was already September. They hadn't localized the product here even yet. And they were in a very crowded space. There are probably like 200 companies in the HR SaaS space, So, those are the kinds of things. It's really hard to have conversations with people who have such unrealistic expectations.
So you're suggesting not to have the ready, fire, aim strategy?
Yeah, exactly. Just don't bring your gun loaded and ready to. Maybe that's not a good analogy, but whatever.
Well, yeah, today particularly, but
Yes.
but certainly not getting political.
Exactly.
So number one is the lack of strategy and clear timeline.
Yes. No plan.
Number two, I think, is, overlooking the cultural impacts. So people do business differently. They talk differently. The nomenclature is different. And so one of the things that we try to do is to get clients to think about that, coming from whatever their culture, whatever their business culture is, into the U.S. Even within the U.S., different states have different cultures, different market segments have different cultures. So as Nasser talked about, the digital asset management client, their customers are all designers. So they're creative and they are,
artists.
Flaky. Yeah, artists. There's a good descriptor.
Okay.
They're not flaky, no, the other client we just got off the phone with was they sell to engineers. And so their clients are coders. And these guys are, all about typically lines of code, but the product that's coming in is going to make their lives easier because it's going to automate, generating applications. So go from what could take you weeks to, a couple of hours.
So, if you want to, you go back to the political analogy, the designer people are like the Bernie supporters and the coders are libertarians. So, we're talking about very different audiences here that you have to address. Yeah. And you have to really impart that on the client, the foreign client, that this is not, this is not a small country. We have like clients coming out of the Czech Republic, which is a very small sort of, single culture, one language. And very manageable. I mean, there are countries, very sophisticated countries like Israel and the Netherlands and so forth, where essentially 6 degrees of separation comes down to 2 or 3. It's a lot easier to build a cohesive message in a market like that, but this is certainly not like that here. And especially when you shift towards the B2C, sectors, it's absolutely the case.
Well, and it seems like something that complicates that idea, as well as the fact that, I mean, you kind of hinted towards it, Nasser, is that it's a much bigger, I mean, wherever you're coming from, you're coming into a much bigger market, and so that has to add significant complications because you may have industries here that don't exist in whatever your home market is, or they're so small that they're not significant targets, so you haven't spent any time there. And so I guess that leads into, it seems like focus would also be an important attribute, whether that's industry vertical focus or buyer persona focus or geographic focus. Is that one of the challenges that you see companies have as well, is maybe the lack of focus?
Well, I think that, you're getting to who should be coming here is the question you're asking, basically. And I think a company that does not have the resources and are probably allocating $1 or $2 million within the next 24 months is not really ready to address this market, unless they want to just plop down a salesman and start selling, which is usually leads to failure. And just to give some perspective on what you said here, the United States alone is 1/3 of the global GDP. Okay, so to you, it may seem like a market.
Well, and California is the 5th largest economy, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I mean, Bill, it's really a paradox. So yes, you definitely want to focus, and you definitely, for a new company coming in, you want those first 5 clients, right? And you want those first 5 referenceable customers. The flip side of that, though, is we have clients that don't think big enough. They don't think about, okay, so once we prove this out and once we figure out our processes and our pipeline and our sales process, then scale. How do we scale that, right? To take advantage of the larger market and some of the technologies to spread the message, more broadly across the U.S. customer base.
So then maybe the challenge, again, kind of working on the negative side, the challenge is not having an incremental plan that essentially, as you prove the business case, that you don't go to whether it's a full rollout or a broader rollout to address the highest value markets.
Yeah, sometimes we see it related to investment. So they'll say, "Oh, I need 2 million or 5 million," and in the United States, because it's bigger, the investors think bigger, and so it's more like a 10 to 20 to 30 million dollar, investment. So it's hard as an entrepreneur, right? You have to be very focused and nail those first milestones for your board. But on the other hand, the upside is bigger, so you want to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as well.
Right.
Well, the upside is is part of the exit plan. I mean, if you're especially a tech company, if you want an exit, you should have a plan to flip the company into Delaware C Corp and go to the American capital markets and the investment community and the VCs and the angels. But if you don't plan that out right, I mean, we have one company that was started by some college students in Denmark, and their seed round was invested by a Hungarian millionaire. That makes it very difficult to attract Silicon Valley investment. There's no familiarity with this, who knows who this Hungarian is? I mean,
right. And not having your assets registered in the US and all that. Yeah.
They convinced, the good thing is they did convince that investor that they should start as a Delaware C Corp. So that part they've done right. But they did ask us then to go and introduce them to some venture capitalists in the Silicon Valley. And you could just see their eyes, their looks change the minute they found out who the seed investors. And it's not because they know anything negative about the seed investors. It's just that they don't have the time or the patience to go do the due diligence in another country.
Right.
There's so many opportunities here for them. So,
so you had mentioned one challenge that you see quite a bit are companies moving key executives to the U.S. to sort of lead the U.S. expansion, and you had mentioned that is a challenge. What about that do you find doesn't work?
Well, first of all, it really has been impossible for the last couple of years for them to do that, which actually has helped us a lot because we've been able to get them started here. I think the biggest problem with that problem that you're talking about is much more of a consumer product problem. It's the not understanding, how to market or sell to U.S. consumers. There are, when they bring over management teams and engineering teams and so forth, there are issues with diversity that they don't necessarily understand.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, and, they don't understand that we have, Me Too is far further ahead, for example, here than it is in most countries. I'm actually sometimes shocked that I still hear, Western European people talking like it's 20 years ago, about.
And there are laws and there are rules
Yeah.
that people need to be cognizant of.
Well, the HR
Try to help
company
them through all those pitfalls.
the Asian HR company had no idea that we actually sometimes HR rules go down to the municipal level in the United States.
Yeah.
You can't just like plop down, one size fits all for the entire country. I mean, every state has labor laws, every county sometimes, every city, you're talking about unions, you're talking about insurance companies, you're talking about, you name it. It's pension funds and retirement plans. You better be ready and you better have a lot of money.
So
address that kind of market.
So bringing over somebody, an executive or whatnot, isn't necessarily bad, but it needs to be coupled with somebody who has local knowledge and can help build a local team and local customer base and so on.
Mentoring and coaching and basically, hand-holding and counseling.
So the two other related topics would be the demonstration of commitment to the U.S. market. So do you have support in the U.S. market? Do you have salespeople? Do you have an address on your website? So, I can't tell you how often potential customers have gone to a website, seen an international address for headquarters and not seen a U.S. address, or has seen a U.S. address and said, okay, great, these guys are committed to a presence in the U.S., right? So, something very similar, very simple as a street address in the U.S. makes a big difference.
Even smaller stuff than that. I personally have a little OCD about websites, and I always go back underneath at the bottom of the page to see when was the last time they changed the date by the copyright sign. So if somebody has not managed to go down there and see that it's still, we're still talking about, what year, 1999 down there or whatever. These people are not paying enough attention to the message they're sending out.
Yeah,
for sure. Steve, you mentioned two things.
Well, the second thing was branding, right? So is your website branded as a U.S. or a global company, right? Is your language, is your message branded as a global company or an international company with a U.S. presence? That's, again, something to think about when you're doing lead generation or marketing materials or blogs. Do they read like a global company or at least have a US brand and US presence?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's funny what you say about the address. Really rings home because we see it at trade shows all the time. People handing business cards with non-US phone numbers and non-US addresses, and for 60 or 50 or $30 you could get business cards, and it maybe $25 a month you can get an address. So there's just no reason why not to have US contact information if you're really invested in the marketplace. But
you get a Google Talk phone number for free.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like zero barrier to doing this other than 5 minutes of somebody's time.
The barrier is pretty low.
I'm sorry.
I said the barrier is pretty low. Yeah.
It couldn't get much lower for sure. And it makes me think about the first question that any U.S. customer asks a new company, which is, tell me who else is doing business with you. And if you don't have a local logo that they recognize, it's just really hard to get anyone's attention.
Even if the logo is not recognizable, even if it's a U.S., here are U.S. clients on a slide or on your website.
Exactly.
That's definitely kind of a game changer. The other game changer that's happened recently is marketing automation. So part of the things we try to help our clients with is, hey, there are new methods of finding leads, right? There are new databases and new tools and new automation. And so we, spend time with them to say, let's put a process together. Let's put the pipes together. to generate the types of leads, and then work on the process to follow up on those leads over time. So it's kind of a new thing, and it's moving quickly these days.
It is. It's always interesting to see, and obviously it depends on the industry. It depends on how good the messaging is, and so on. As a general thing, we kind of see, and I think there's some really good success stories, no question, but we see people sort of hiding behind people that aren't good at it, just hiding behind social media as a mechanism to market, as opposed to a real precise tool with A/B testing and all those types of things that get us to a much better place. And yeah, it's just, it seems like we're not teaching the next generation both love of the customer and love of sales and solving problems, as well as love of that interactivity, because everybody just wants to, be 10,000 kilometers away and just shoot marketing into that next country and hope something responds. It's a really it's a funny dynamic.
Yeah, it's a very competitive situation, right? Your email is going to land in somebody's inbox next to 20 other emails. How do you make sure that your email gets the click response over all the other ones? How do we make sure that your TikTok influencer is the right person to be dancing around on the TikTok stage to grab your clients who are going to click on your website to trial or buy your product. So yeah, there's definitely a fit there, and there's definitely a competition there that people have to understand.
Yeah, reminds me of Seth Godin and talking about the purple cow, right? And how do you stand out and be different? So let's maybe switch over to the strategy side, and I think we've identified sort of a bunch of the fail points. So maybe starting at the beginning, how does a company, when they say, okay, we've found good success in wherever our home market is, whether it's Europe or Asia or Africa or South America, and they say, we want to start looking at getting into the U.S. Where do they start? What's the process?
Well, so I always go back to find those first 5 customers, but there are also some other ways that international companies can gain credibility. So that's one of the big challenges, is that credibility. How do we gain that credibility? And one of the ways is through partnerships. So being very strategic about finding the right partners that are going to give you that credibility, that are going to give you that path to market. That's definitely a conversation to have. The second way to think about it is communities. So again, a relatively new trend. Who are the folks online that influence others? And where do your customers consume their information about different products? What communities do they go to absorb that information? And so, we like to have that conversation. And some of our international guys are like, communities? What are you talking about, communities?
Yeah.
And they understand LinkedIn, but they don't necessarily understand the other various communities that are popping up, from scratch in some cases.
Slack and all those, you name it. Just you seem to hear of a new one every few months, right? And some of them stick and some of them don't.
Yeah. But sometimes, you're selling a large corporate type product. The corporate partner you want is a large corporation. And, how do you break into those people, establish a relationship, have the first 2-3 conversations, show the other large corporation that it's in their interest to form some sort of a partnership. And then how do you advertise that partnership out to, again, go back to the credibility question, right? You gain that credibility.
You can imagine for a smaller foreign company how difficult that would be. I mean, that's why you need somebody here who has a very deep network, and
that's where the network definitely comes into play.
Has been in this industry for 2, 3, 4 decades potentially. Imagine a car part supplier that wants to build a partnership with General Motors. That's impossible unless you bring in a former VP from GM to work with you. It's just not good.
Yeah,
You know, it's funny. We did a pretty big event 2 years ago that it was a 24-hour event, essentially a large virtual expo to help companies come into the U.S. And we had a whole bunch of companies that had been successful at U.S. market entry, and they did essentially case studies of their pathway. And one of the questions we asked each one of them was sort of what was the most important factor in your U.S. market entry success. Number one, and they all said this unsolicited and undirected, was the network they established as they were coming in. So that ability, just as you said, Nasser, to leverage contacts, connections, relationships, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
super powerful.
Yeah, and I would say Nasser and I are not experts in every technology in every business, but we know people who bring a lot of value, right, in different fields, whether it's nano biotechnology, imaging, or cybersecurity, to solar panel mechanization and software.
To aerospace. I mean, we're talking to a group of aerospace, part suppliers, and they're all part of this cluster called it's a national one. I won't name the country, but I knew immediately who to call. I mean, I know an aerospace engineer with an MIT PhD who's semi-retired, now working on drones and so forth. He's a big hobbyist and building his own little planes, and he knows the industry inside out. So that's where it is. I'm not going to pretend I know anything about how to build an airplane or market, the supply chain components of it.
Yeah, but building the team around the technology, the expertise in the company, I think is valuable. And
sure. So you talked about building partnerships and building that network, building the community, building the team. What's next in sort of the company's evolution to enter the U.S.?
Well, so once we come up with the strategy and the sales process, define the key customers with their pain points and the key messaging, and we lay that all out. I mean, Nasser and I are MBAs, so we're kind of nerdy that way.
Speak for yourself, Steve. I've got a baseball cap on.
But then it becomes a matter of, okay, so what's our vision quarter to quarter to quarter to scale up? And, so we have conversations about hiring. So what's the right hiring plan? How do we assist in hiring? What's the right profile? What's the job description? So, how do you write a job description that you can post online that's going to attract the right kinds of people and not a mountain of the wrong kinds of people? So that's a pretty typical conversation about, scaling a successful company. And companies that have been around for, many years coming into the US, they've sort of cracked the code on their side, but, they do need help in building out their organizations on this side of the pond.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. And in terms of sort of the execution of the process, when we first started, you talked a little bit about metrics and being able to measure. I suppose it's the balance between strategy and metrics so that you can continue to adjust and evolve your strategy. So how does a company sort of measure their success in entry? What are some of the tools that you suggest or methods?
A growth plan. I mean, we have actually a partner that specializes in growth architecture. He's a former McKinsey partner who has basically designed this software algorithm to help companies lay out their decision tree outlook. And so if that'd be a very nice little investment to have that up front, so that you can look back at it 6 months from now and see how you performed against it. And
one of the big values of that particular tool is hitting your forecast. So if you're committed to your executive team, and if you're committed to board members and investors, having that ability to hit your forecast is really golden. Oops. Sorry about that.
I think
It certainly creates good credibility, right? Besides
Yes. Right.
the success it creates.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing to think about, kind of one of the new things is, there's now new tools out there using artificial intelligence to measure the effectiveness of your marketing and sales processes, and marketing spend and sales spend. Sorry about that.
They really want to talk to you.
Yes.
That's a persistent salesperson.
I said no.
I don't want your product.
Exactly.
So persistence. Did I tell you about persistence? How important persistence is. If you're coming into the US, you need to be persistent.
Exactly.
So.
One of the things that we see, and I'd love your thoughts on this, we see quite a bit, and this is getting maybe more discreet, but it goes to sort of marketing communications, as we see companies, particularly technology companies, and I should say that this is also a problem in the US, but more with offshore companies, that they tend to, when they're communicating, whether on social media or in sell sheets or on their website, tend to be very feature focused and not benefit focused. And so there you have all, you have the scientist, the developer who's so proud of what they've created, with really the messaging has absolutely no connection to a customer problem. And it seems like that's when we see companies coming in, pretty much 100% of the time, that's something we need to address and correct. I guess, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time.
Steve is smiling.
Yeah, he has lots of thoughts on that, given his background with all these companies.
I mean, they love their babies, right?
Yeah.
Every parent loves their babies, and engineers and founders love their babies. And so one of the conversations we pretty frequently have is, okay, so who's your chief marketing officer? Who's your first marketing hire? Because they haven't really thought.
Or do you hire the marketing person before the salesperson? I mean, these are all tough questions. I mean, is it the chief revenue officer you want first, or is it the chief marketing officer that you want first? And those, I think, to your question, one of the luckiest companies in the world is SAP. If it wasn't for Y2K, I don't think they would have ever succeeded, because it was formed by a bunch of German physicists. And I've had meetings with them where I didn't understand a word of what they said. Because you tell them that your interface is not user friendly, and they're like, I'm a PhD physicist, how dare you tell me? It's like, okay, well, you're really lucky where you are, because I don't think today SAP would have ever succeeded, honestly.
Not very empathic is what you're saying.
Not at all user centric. It's all about, you better listen to you're going to do it like I tell you you're supposed to do it.
Right. It's right because we said it's right.
Yeah. I guess going back to metrics, I think one of the just quick comments is, young companies don't tend to measure and manage their business via metrics. Larger established companies bring in people who are more analytic and more metric focused. So, I think one of the pieces of advice we would give young companies is, spend a little time and define the metrics and the goals of your employees, and review them. Make sure that you review them and hold them accountable. And today there are tools out there that make that very simple and very easy. So, spend your $50 a month and establish your management process, and, it'll save you hours and days and weeks in managing your people, which no young company has that sort of excess timeline around.
So a question on that, because it totally resonates with me, and our work is all with B2B companies, so longer sales cycle, 6 to 24 months is sort of generally what our clients look at, and the obvious thing to measure is revenue, right? So but that takes a long time, and boy, you hate to find out 18 months down the road that we're not creating the revenue we want. Are there some or do you have thoughts about some leading indicators that would sort of indicate revenue or the likelihood of revenue without necessarily seeing revenue yet? Things that would give you confidence or indicate to you that maybe you should adjust strategy.
Well, I mean, the simple answer is that the pipeline and the numbers of leads, right, and the close rates. But I think I always like to look at the time. So how long did it take to get from meeting 1 to meeting 2 to meeting 3?
What's the urgency of the customer?
Yeah. So both the urgency of the customer, the urgency of the employees and the company, and track that time on a regular basis. So once a month, how long did it take you? Are your times, your durations increasing or decreasing? And then in your quarterly reports, that's definitely a metric that you want to take a look at. And, in the era of COVID, where people are just doing Zoom presentations over and over and over versus trade shows, how do you measure those two mixes against one another? If the trade show gives you a shortened sales cycle and, a good number of leads at a certain percentage, what's the ROI on your trade show versus your phone calling versus your TikTok sponsorships, and how that works out.
Right.
So,
that makes sense. So I have one additional question, and it's something I don't hear spoken about a lot in kind of what we collectively do, which is the importance of time. And you kind of hinted at it, Steve. And I guess I always think of this sort of hourglass with the sand sort of quickly dropping out of it, and any campaign or any sort of major investment that companies make, they have a variety of stakeholders that need to join them in that sort of that journey, whether it's employees, whether it's investors or management team or any of that, and salespeople and customers and so on. And I think you hinted at it in terms of if the span of time is long between successes. I guess one of the things that I see happen quite often is if there's not traction in a certain amount of time and or scaling, that it's really hard to keep the stakeholders engaged, and you kind of begin losing these valuable assets almost like cancer. They just sort of fall off and go find somewhere else to go earn their living or get their return. But do you have thoughts about the sort of that urgency or the sort of the pace of a successful U.S. market entry company?
Nas, you want to kick off that one, and I'll follow up on you?
This is more yours. I'll follow you.
Well, so the reason I'm grinning on this one is that, we talk to people from different countries and their sense of urgency is all over the map. So, we're in Silicon Valley, and, if you're not doing something 48 hours from your first phone call, there's too much water under the bridge, right? I want to know by Thursday, what's our plan? And, these guys in some places, it's like, yeah, call me in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. I had a guy in Germany tell me to call him in 16 months, he said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we run into that.
Not 18 or 12, 16.
Right. An engineer. He very, very personal.
And, so another example is we run webinars, podcasts for clients, and we say, okay, we want to set these up and we want to have topics and slides, and I want to have a dry run every time we do this. And, which means, some sort of action every 3 or 4 days. Right. And these people look at me like, wow, this crazy American guy is really anal about all this. And so I'm like, Silicon Valley, that's what you need. You need that level of focus and that turnaround time, right? But again, on our side, we need to be sensitive to our clients' timing and culture. And,
Oh, there's also reality because, almost all companies that are run by, engineering teams have very over-optimistic, launch plans and so forth. And you'll see a software package that's delayed, released by 2 years sometimes. And,
Wow.
and then it happens quite often. I mean, the worst example is Theranos. I mean, so it never really.
Yeah. I mean, we've got clients that have missed their release, a year?
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got clients that have missed their release, a week. And again, the commitment and hitting your commitments, it means something. It's a big deal. And we try to coach our clients that, it means something. If you lay down a roadmap and you lay down a release schedule, hit your release schedule, or don't lay it down.
Well, I even think here, and I think something that a lot of, it's not the same in all countries, but even just hiring and retaining salespeople here, it's a very competitive sales market. They're very expensive.
Yeah.
And as you well know, often salespeople, a decent part of their compensation is commission based. So if the release date's pushed back 6 months, or or there's just not the pace to get the sales collateral up to snuff, or any of those, all the infrastructure stuff that will enable sales, I mean, they so quickly just move on to the next opportunity too. So cobbling together a team is hard enough. Keeping them together in a dynamic environment seems like it could be a really hard road.
You can schedule that properly, so you're not hiring a $300,000 enterprise sales guy, a year prematurely, because that can actually bankrupt, a VC-funded startup. So I think one of the great advantages of having all these online tools and so forth and automation is that it does allow you to buy time where you can ramp up. But then when you ramp up, though, I mean, that's another huge topic here. Is can you scale up to 100 people all of a sudden within a year? And do you have the HR department to do that? And do you have the resources to do that? You have the training material. Do you have there's a lot of expectations. People want ping pong tables in Silicon Valley and so forth. And they need nice spaces and they want free lunch. And you better be ready for that. I mean, for a lot of these companies, these are very foreign concepts. Why would I feed my employees? It's just I'm sorry. I mean,
we had a client say, I need to hire 100 people. How do I hire 100 people?
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, let's have
Yeah,
that.
sit down. Sit down for a few minutes.
Let's have a drink over that one. Yes.
How many HR people do you want to burn through before you get that done?
Yeah. And are you ready? I mean, you can't just, if you bring in like a foreign HR person, it goes back to what I was saying before. They'll put in an ad like, we want a male 25 to 35. And it's like, no.
Right. Yeah. We're breaking so many laws.
Why don't you specify the race while you're at it too? I mean, it's just, no, it's not how it works here.
Right. Well, this has really been great. I think you've shared some wonderful nuggets. I guess when you kind of look at the big rocks in terms of the things that you would, from a strategy standpoint, really recommend to companies that are exploring the U.S. And I'll go to Nasser first. What are in your mind? What are the kind of the biggest recommendations you'd have for a company that's building their strategy to enter the U.S.?
Building the strategy. I mean, I'd say hire somebody in the U.S. who actually writes your strategic plan and your go-to-market plan. And that involves, growth architecture, which is what we touched on before. And then we'll start talking, and then start, essentially scheduling your implementation and so forth. That would be my biggest recommendation, honestly. And also just pay attention to the market and just realize that this is not your own country, and you have a very different audience, and it's very diverse, and it's multi-ethnic. And it's a huge, this is, Europe has how many countries? We have 50 states, and each of them might as well be a country, right?
And territories on top of that. Yeah.
Territories on top of that, yes.
Yeah.
And languages, and we have, and subcultures, and You did not address the the Cajun market in Louisiana the same as you would some Native American tribe in Idaho.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how about for you, Steve?
Well, I come down on three different things. The culture that Nas talked about, understanding that and being sensitive to that. But the other two would be make sure you demonstrate that commitment to the U.S. market, that you have some feet on the ground, and you show your clients that you're committed to the U.S. market. And maybe that's as simple as tech support hours for the U.S. Maybe it's having someone to take sales calls who's from the U.S. And then the brand, and think about how to maybe not completely shift over to a U.S. brand, but have a global international brand that that represents your company as one that is doing business in the U.S. with U.S. customers and U.S. clients. So
I love it.
Those would be the big rocks.
Yeah. No.
It's also it goes without saying these days, and I think we don't even need to tell people that they have to. English should be the company's primary language. You better have an English language website, which goes to the branding that Steve was talking about, and have an American, or English-speaking copywriter review your translated works. We've actually, Steve and I got embarrassed because somebody pointed out on the bottom, a wrong word that we hadn't even noticed in one of our pieces of collab.
All of our websites are works in progress. That's no doubt about it. Yeah. We go between functional and just several stages below that of embarrassment and post embarrassment and so on. So yeah, no, totally get it. But yeah, we agree that there's no E in program, right? Is that what we're saying? Is
yes.
Yeah, amongst plenty of other words like that.
Exactly. Well, this is great. So what we'll do in the description is we'll put your contact info and links to link to the Inner Onion website, and make sure people get connected. Also, to our audience, make sure you like and subscribe so you stay in tune to all the great info coming up. But I really want to thank you, Nasser and Steve, for taking the time, and we'll share this and certainly look forward to additional conversations as we go forward.
Great. Thank you, Bill. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye-bye.